So Louis, today we're at the dam and we're fishing, and on Sunday you made mention of an interesting topic or discussion point. Where did Jesus go when he died? And for the guys that are discipling you, they gave you a project or an assignment to do, and I got to read it today. It was very interesting, but I want to hear from your heart and your thoughts. Share with me. Where did Jesus go when he died?
Ezra, when it came to answering that question, I always, when I talk, people ask me simple questions, I can't just answer straight. I always have to come up with a big story, to get my point across. And when it came to answering that question, I had more questions in my mind that I had to answer before I could answer that question. And Jesus as he was man and God, so he was two things. And then my idea was, because he's two things and we're only one thing, man, where does he go? You see, so I had to first understand, where do we go as man when we die? So I read up and I found a few verses, and I found a verse on where a man would go, or if he was unsaved, where he would go. And then I happened to find a verse that explains maybe where those who obey God, where they go, and to heaven or hell. And then I thought about Jesus, and I thought about Jesus on the cross. There's one particular verse that struck me when I was thinking about this, is Jesus on the cross. He was him, Jesus, in the middle, and between him were two criminals. And I thought, we got heaven and hell, and the one criminal, acknowledged Jesus on the cross. He knew who Jesus was on that cross, and he asked to be remembered by Jesus. And the other criminal on the other side of Jesus didn't really acknowledge him, didn't really believe that was Jesus. He sort of insulted Jesus on the cross. And I thought, that's maybe heaven and hell, and then what could be in the middle of heaven and hell if there was a place? And because I'm scientifically minded, I like to think these big ideas. I like to ask questions and think big. So, for instance, when it comes to evolution and that, I have these big ideas, and whether they are true or not, well, that's not up to me to decide. God can judge my thoughts, and he can always correct me if I am in the wrong thinking. So when I pictured Jesus on that cross, I thought he's like a line that separates, he divides the people, those who believe in him and those who don't. So I thought maybe there is a line between heaven and hell. And then I did some digging, and I found a verse that I actually asked my mother, and she pointed me to this story about a rich man and a poor man, and the rich man has everything he wants and has everything, and the poor man is asking the rich man for the food that drops off the table, and then it cuts to them dying. The poor man dies, and he goes beside Abraham in heaven, and the rich man dies and he gets buried, and then he's in hell. And then the rich man sees them across, and what they say, sees them across a pit. So from heaven to hell, he sees Abraham and Lazarus, that was the poor man's name, across from hell to across the pit. And then he asks the poor man or Abraham if the poor man can dip his fingers in water and bring the water over to hell to quench him, because he's in pain. So I thought, there's that pit. Could that be that line that separates? And because I'm a scientist, you I had an analogy that, if you have if you have a cup of water and it's half full of water, but actually the cup is full. It's got water and air, so it's theoretically like a full cup. It's just full of water, half full of water and half full of air. And I thought, there's that theoretical line that separates air from water. We in our brains know what we don't see at the top is air, and what we see, the liquid, is water. And I thought maybe there is a theoretical line that separates how. And in that verse, Abraham was explaining that that no one could cross over. If he wanted to cross over from there to where the rich man is, you wouldn't be able to do so, and neither would the rich man be able to cross over to them on the other side. And I thought, well, then if we die and man either goes to hell or heaven, what about Jesus? And then I thought, Jesus, when he died and rose again, or on the third day, he ascended up to heaven. He didn't die and go to heaven. He ascended up. It was like his body rose up and then went to heaven. So I thought it wouldn't make sense for Jesus to die and go to heaven. If maybe, I don't know if Jesus knew the plan that God had for him, but I would assume that whatever that it wasn't he wasn't going to die and go to heaven, but he was going to rise and ascend to heaven. So I thought, where would Jesus go? If he died and went into this pit, well, that was my thought, could he be the one? Because he's technically, when he died on the cross, the sin, when I was thinking about it, I didn't know if the sin was in Jesus or on Jesus. It just said there that he bore sin, that God made him share sin with us. So I wasn't sure. So that was the other big question, was what about if sin is in man? Sin wasn't in Jesus, but it seems that maybe sin was on Jesus. So what then? So then I thought, okay, if the sin is not in Jesus, but maybe on Jesus, maybe he's in between, and maybe when he died, that moment when he became a spirit, maybe he momentarily was in this pit, and maybe because he was between man and God, and he could theoretically move across to whichever side he wanted. Then I thought, wow, what would Jesus do? Would he go straight to heaven from the pit, or straight to hell? And then I did some reading, and I found another verse that speaks about him when he died. He died physically, and then he was made a spirit, and then he was preaching to the imprisoned souls that were from Noah's time. And I thought, where's the imprisoned souls? Are they in heaven, or are they in hell? And then I thought, maybe momentarily he got into that pit, and then the plan was for him to go into hell and go and show himself in hell to preach to the imprisoned souls. So yes, there was a lot of questions. I find that for me to answer a question straight is a bit difficult. So I come up with other questions, or I think about other questions that I can answer, that may answer the question I'm answering. It's like for every one question there's 10 more questions. So until you've answered those 10 questions, can you answer this question? And that sort of was my thought pattern and all that. As a scientist, I try to explain it as I read it, or as I understood it from the passages, and my version is very simple. It's the GNT version, Good News Translation version. So it's very simple, and it was very scientifically I tried to do it very scientifically, as if, a scientist was doing it. And he had, a scientist asks questions and needs and believes there's answers to the questions he asks. And then there's theories that we try and prove, So we need evidence or proof. So I took it in that way, in trying to figure out, what is going on if you're man, and what is going on if you're in between, like Jesus. So that was my thought pattern, or that it could be, that pit could just be like a void. We speak of voids in space. A void is a portion of space or that has nothing in it, very little in it. So maybe that line or that pit is a void, And then I ended off my thought is, I thought about how it would feel if you died and went nowhere. Like, I know we all long for rest, whether that is physical rest or spiritual rest, or just sometimes some people just want to pass away, and they believe that there will be nothing after passing away. So I thought, equivalent to passing away and in a scientific way, and going nowhere would be like falling into the event horizon of a black hole. So the event horizon of a black hole is a scientific thing where anything that goes in will need to travel faster than light to get out. So a black hole is the only thing that light can travel into, but it cannot travel out of. So anything that passes between that point is technically no return. You can't escape it. You see. So as a scientist, I use analogies to understand things in the Bible and all that. And I like to think big, big ideas, big theories. So when I answered that question, I answered it like a scientist.
Right.
It was mainly that I couldn't put just that verse. I know the answer might have just been that last verse about God, Jesus preaching to the imprisoned souls. The answer might be there, but I thought I'm not just going to put down that. I want to put down what my heart. I want to put down what I think and my thoughts, and I find that's God. If God allows me to think these things and put it down onto paper, then He can always correct me if I am wrong about my thoughts. But then He understands where we're coming from and what we say, and He knows our heart. And I'm sure He sometimes sits up there and goes, "What is Louis thinking?" Or, But maybe it's good that he's thinking about this, so that I can share and lead him to a thought or an idea. So yeah, that was my thought pattern. It's a bit long, but I think you must not be afraid to ask questions. A scientist asks questions. If you're not asking questions and you're not trying to find the answer to the questions, you will never know. You sort of have to ask questions and go find out answers to those questions. And that's what I did there. I did what I think a scientist would do in regards to finding a logical meaning or a meaning out of something by asking questions and seeking answers. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, bud.
Sure.